In 1992, one of the world's biggest tire manufacturers suddenly stopped an entire shipment of brand new tires just before they were sent to dealers. The reason seemed almost ridiculous. Thin colored lines running across the tread had been applied incorrectly. To an ordinary driver, it was nothing more than paint, something that would disappear after a few miles. But to the engineers, it was serious enough to send thousands of tires back for inspection.
That strange incident raised a question most drivers had never even thought about. Why are those colorful lines painted across brand new tires in the first place? At first glance, they look like simple factory markings with no purpose once the tire reaches a customer. But the real reason is far more interesting. Those lines are not there to tell you whether a tire is good, bad, soft, hard, or suitable for summer or winter. They are part of a hidden system designed to prevent mistakes long before the tire ever reaches your car. That strange incident raised a question most drivers had never even thought about. Why are those colorful lines painted across brand new tires in the first place? At first glance, they look like simple factory markings with no purpose once the tire reaches a customer. But the real reason is far more interesting. Those lines are not there to tell you whether a tire is good, bad, soft, hard, or suitable for summer or winter. They are part of a hidden system designed to prevent mistakes long before the tire ever reaches your car.
To understand how important those tiny lines can be, consider what happened during a high-speed vehicle test. A sports sedan was being pushed through routine testing when the driver suddenly noticed something seriously wrong. At high speed, the car became dangerously unstable. All four tires appeared brand new and identical, yet the vehicle was behaving completely differently from what engineers expected.
The tires were immediately removed and sent to a factory laboratory for examination. What the engineers discovered was shocking. During production, one tire had been built using an uncured tread strip made from a different rubber compound. The material had actually been intended for another tire specification with almost the same shape and tread profile. Once finished, the tire looked almost identical to the others. But internally, its rubber stiffness and mass distribution were significantly different.
This was exactly the kind of mistake those colored markings were designed to prevent. A modern tire may look like nothing more than a solid piece of black rubber, but underneath that surface is an extremely complicated engineering structure. Steel belts, textile cords, multiple rubber compounds, and carefully designed layers all work together. Every component has to be positioned with remarkable accuracy. Even a small mistake can become a serious problem once the tire is exposed to high speeds, heavy loads, and constant road forces. The pressure on tire factories only increased as production volumes grew. Inside massive storage areas, hundreds or even thousands of rolls of uncured tread material could be waiting for the next stage of production. The problem was that these materials often looked almost exactly the same. Without some form of visual identification, even an experienced worker could struggle to distinguish one rubber compound from another after a long shift. That is where the colored lines became extremely useful. Over time, drivers began noticing those bright stripes on brand new tires and started giving them meanings of their own. For some motorists, a fresh colored line became a psychological sign that the tire was new, genuine, and straight from the factory. Some even believed that the presence of the paint proved the tire had never been used or stored for years in damaging conditions. At used tire markets and repair shops, these markings became almost a ritual. If a stripe was faded or missing, some buyers became suspicious. They might demand a lower price or even walk away, believing the tire had been previously used or was being misrepresented by the seller. But none of that explains what the lines actually mean. As tire manufacturing became faster and more sophisticated, factories faced a major challenge. How could they prevent workers from confusing thousands of nearly identical pieces of raw rubber? Human error was becoming one of the biggest risks in the production process.
A tired operator could easily grab the wrong tread strip, especially when two materials looked almost identical. The solution had to be fast, simple, and impossible to overlook. Colored lines provided exactly that. And this is where the story gets interesting, because the mystery surrounding those stripes created countless myths among drivers. With little official explanation reaching the public, people began inventing their own theories. One of the most common claims was that each color represented a specific rubber compound. Some drivers believed red meant an especially hard summer tire, while blue or green supposedly indicated a softer winter compound. Others claimed the stripes showed the maximum speed of the tire, or revealed the country where the tire was supposed to be sold. But those explanations sound much more complicated than the truth. Another popular theory suggested that colored stripes separated first-grade tires from second-grade products. According to this rumor, certain colors supposedly indicated perfect quality, while other colors represented tires with minor factory defects that had been discounted. That idea is also misleading. A manufacturer cannot simply send a defective tire onto the road and label it with a different color. Tires are safety-critical products, and the color of a tread stripe does not determine whether the finished tire is high quality or low quality. Then came even stranger theories. Some automotive forums claimed the paint contained secret chemical markers that allowed manufacturers to track rubber as it crossed international borders. Others suggested that certain colored stripes were used for special factory testing programs or secret racing compounds. Another theory claimed the paint was a sophisticated anti-counterfeiting system that would be almost impossible for small manufacturers to reproduce. All of these explanations sound mysterious, but the real purpose is much more practical. There is, however, one detail about these lines that makes the whole process even more fascinating. Look closely at a brand new tire, and you may notice that the stripe runs continuously around the entire tread, forming an almost perfect ring. But here is the strange part. The paint is applied to the rubber before the tire even becomes a tire. At that stage, the material is still a long, flat strip of uncured rubber. It has no steel frame, no finished sidewall, and no circular shape. So how does a simple flat strip eventually become a perfectly formed tire with the colored marking running around it? The answer lies deep inside the manufacturing process. Modern tires begin with a technology known as continuous extrusion. Imagine a giant industrial machine forcing hot, uncured rubber through a specially designed opening under enormous pressure. Instead of producing a finished tire, the machine creates a continuous strip of tread material that can stretch for hundreds of meters through the factory. And that strip is not necessarily made from one uniform rubber compound. Different sections can contain different formulations designed for different purposes. Some areas need greater resistance to wear, while others require more flexibility and specific performance characteristics. These materials move continuously through the production line while still hot, soft, and workable. And that strip is not necessarily made from one uniform rubber compound. Different sections can contain different formulations designed for different purposes. Some areas need greater resistance to wear, while others require more flexibility and specific performance characteristics. These materials move continuously through the production line while still hot, soft, and workable. Before the material is ever turned into a finished tire, it goes through strict inspections. Factories measure the shape, thickness, density, and consistency of the tread material. Even a relatively small deviation can eventually cause serious imbalance or vibration at high speed. Detecting a problem while the rubber is still in its raw form allows the factory to correct it or recycle the material before it becomes a finished product. But there is another problem: storage. Once the continuous tread is cut into specific lengths, thousands of pieces may be placed into storage racks waiting for assembly. From the outside, they can look almost identical, yet their chemical composition, dimensions, stiffness, and intended application may be completely different. If the wrong tread strip reaches the assembly machine, the factory could produce hundreds of incorrect tires before anyone notices. That is why these simple colored stripes can be so valuable.
And there is an important distinction many drivers miss. The colored lines on the tread are not the same thing as the colored dots you may see on the sidewall of a finished tire. Those markings serve completely different purposes. Sidewall dots can be used during tire mounting to help technicians identify specific characteristics of the finished tire and position it correctly relative to the wheel. A yellow mark, for example, can identify the tire's lightest point, while another marking may indicate a location associated with radial force variation or stiffness. The tread stripes are different.
Their job is mainly connected to the manufacturing stage, before the tire becomes the finished product mounted on your vehicle. So why use paint instead of stamping a permanent mark into the rubber? Because the marking is temporary by design. And now we reach the real answer behind the mystery. Those bright lines are essentially a temporary technological code applied to uncured tread material, so workers and automated systems can quickly identify different materials during manufacturing and logistics. Once the tire has completed production and reaches the road, the markings have served their purpose. That is why you may see them disappear after only a short period of driving. The paint isn't supposed to remain permanently. It is designed to provide identification during the manufacturing process and then gradually disappear through normal contact with the road. Inside a modern tire factory, this simple system becomes much more important when you consider the scale of production. Imagine enormous quantities of black rubber strips sitting next to one another, each potentially designed for a different model, vehicle type, compound, or production specification. To the human eye, they can look almost identical. A bright line immediately creates a visual difference, and that difference can be recognized in seconds. As technology has advanced, the process has become increasingly automated. Modern factories can use optical sensors, cameras, laser measurements, and computerized systems to inspect the tread material while it moves along the production line. Robots can then handle and position components with incredible precision. Yet simple visual markings can still provide an additional layer of protection. Because even the most advanced sensor can malfunction. A camera can become dirty, a scanner can fail, a system can experience a technical problem. When that happens, a simple colored line can still give a human operator an immediate visual warning. There is another myth worth clearing up. You may have noticed that different tire brands use different combinations of colors. This sometimes leads people to believe there is a universal international code where every color has one fixed meaning. There isn't. Manufacturers can develop their own internal marking systems based on their individual factories, production lines, and logistics requirements. A particular color may represent one type of material at one factory and something completely different at another. Even the same manufacturer can change its internal system when production methods or materials are updated. That means you cannot reliably walk into a tire shop, look at the colored stripes, and determine the tire's compound, quality, speed rating, or season simply by decoding the paint. The markings were never designed for that purpose. Even the paint itself has to be carefully selected. It must work on hot, uncured rubber without damaging the material or interfering with its chemical properties. The marking needs to remain visible long enough to serve its purpose, but it also needs to disappear without affecting the finished tire. That balance is why specialized temporary marking compounds are used. And perhaps the most interesting part is that these seemingly primitive lines can survive alongside some of the most advanced manufacturing technology in the world. A factory can have robotic systems, optical scanners, computerized quality control, and laser measurement equipment, yet a simple colored stripe can still serve as a reliable backup. Sometimes the simplest solution is also one of the smartest. Every tire you see on the road has gone through a remarkable transformation. It begins as a long strip of hot, uncured rubber and eventually becomes a complex multi-layer structure capable of carrying enormous loads while traveling at high speeds. And somewhere near the beginning of that journey, a simple colored line may have helped make sure the correct piece of rubber ended up in the correct tire. So the next time you walk past a brand new tire and notice those bright stripes across the tread, don't assume they're a secret code telling you how good the tire is, how soft the rubber feels, or how fast you can drive. Their real purpose is much simpler and much more important. They are a quiet part of the factory's quality control system, created to help prevent human error before that tire ever reaches the road. A tiny line of paint may look meaningless to the driver, but inside a tire factory, that little line can be the difference between thousands of identical-looking pieces of rubber being confused and the right material ending up exactly where it belongs. Have you ever looked closely at a brand new tire and noticed hundreds of tiny rubber hairs sticking out from its surface? They look almost like little strands of fur covering the tread and sidewalls. Most people assume they're some kind of defect, leftover material, or even proof that the tire has never touched the road. But what if those strange little hairs are actually created by one of the most important stages of tire manufacturing? And here's the part that makes them even more interesting. Those tiny rubber hairs aren't added to the tire on purpose. They are created as a natural result of how the tire is manufactured. Yet their existence reveals something fascinating about what happens inside a tire factory long before the tire reaches your car. To understand where these strange hairs come from, we first have to go inside the mold where a tire gets its final shape. A tire begins its life as a complicated combination of rubber compounds, steel belts, textile materials, and other components. These layers are assembled together while the rubber is still soft and unfinished. At this point, the tire doesn't look much like the finished product sitting in a showroom. The unfinished tire is placed inside the mold and exposed to high temperature and pressure. The rubber gradually takes on the exact shape required for the finished tire. The tread pattern forms, the sidewalls take their final shape, and the different components become permanently bonded together. But there is a problem. When the rubber is being pressed inside the mold, air can become trapped between the tire and the mold surface. If that air cannot escape, it could create tiny imperfections, bubbles, or incomplete sections in the finished tire. And this is where those mysterious rubber hairs come into the story. Tire molds contain extremely small ventilation passages. These microscopic channels allow trapped air and gases to escape while the rubber is being pressed into its final shape. As the soft rubber fills the mold, a tiny amount of material can enter those ventilation holes. Once the tire is cured and removed from the mold, that small amount of rubber remains attached to the surface. And that's what creates those little rubber hairs. So the hairs aren't glued onto the tire, they aren't painted on, and they aren't some special feature designed to improve grip. They're simply the result of rubber passing into the tiny air vent passages during manufacturing. But now comes the question that surprises many people. The answer is surprisingly simple. In most cases, there is no important reason to remove them. Those tiny strands have essentially no meaningful effect on the tire's performance. They don't provide extra traction, they don't make the tire safer, and they aren't an indicator of a particular rubber compound. The number and appearance of these tiny hairs can vary depending on the tire design, the mold, the manufacturing process, and even the areas of the tire where ventilation is required. A brand new tire can have very few visible hairs and still be completely new. And a tire covered with hundreds of them isn't necessarily better than another tire with fewer. So the hairs are not a reliable quality test. But there is another interesting detail. If you look closely at a new tire, you may notice that the little hairs aren't distributed randomly. Some areas have many of them, while other parts have very